Hi everybody and welcome to another Dev Superpowers. My name is Ben Cull and today I'm super excited to take you through absolutely everything that's changed in ASP.NET 5 and MVC 6. Now this episode is called Where's My Cheese? Because that is exactly what has happened with this latest release. There are so many new features and new technologies, especially to the .NET community. A lot of these technologies have been around for a while, but they're new to all of us. I remember going through all sorts of grief when I first started investigating the ASP.NET 5 updates. And so what I want to do is just take everything that I've learned and give you a quick overview about pretty much all of the things I'm going to cover. It's going to be an excellent episode. Bear with me. I go through a lot of content, but by the end, nothing should seem new and scary to you. You should be ready to just get in there and edit everything. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Dev Superpowers. Let's get stuck into it. Okie dokie, so if you haven't witnessed a Dev Superpowers before, you're in for a treat because what we do is we just sit down and we get started. So I'm going to throw open a new project. And again, the whole point of today is to go take a look at the ASP.NET 5 and or MVC 6 stuff. So I'm going to go I'm going to go cheese 2 into my temporary folder. And then you'll notice underneath the ASP.NET 4.5 templates, there are some ASP.NET 5 preview templates. We're going to go for web application, and we'll leave the authentication on individual user accounts just so you can take a look at what that looks like. We're not going to tick Microsoft Azure, we're just going to hit go. All right, I'm very excited to show you about all of this functionality. There's so much going on. And again, as I say in most of my videos, if you haven't spun up a file new project in a while, you very well should, because things change all the time. And it's good to keep up to date with this sort of stuff. So a lot of what I'm talking about today, the information on this page, the one you're presented with when you first spin up a project, is really quite relevant. If you take a look at the new concepts, a lot of this I'm going to be talking about. You can see Gulp and Bauer here. It really does do a good job of linking you to some quality content. But that's not what we're going to look at today. We're going to take a look. We'll just hit save and build. We'll spin up the project just to make sure everything has found the right packages and built everything correctly. And here we go. That's a look at the new ASP.NET 5 startup page. So what I'd like to do today is really just walk from top to bottom through the solution. I'd like to show you how the references work. We'll roll through the WW root, take a look at dependencies with Bauer and NVM. I'm going to take a look at the controllers and how they've been merged. The Web API controllers and the MVC controllers have been merged together. I'm going to take a look at the services and how the dependency injection is now built in to ASP.NET 5. We'll take a look at the startup CS and the config.json because you'll notice there's no more web.config in here. And finally, we're going to take a look at Gulp and really just the initial scenarios that you're going to need to do when you start a new ASP.NET 5 project. So let's jump straight into it. Let's take a look at references. Now, the first difference between ASP.NET 4.5 and ASP.NET 5 is the capability to target multiple .NET versions at once. Now, you'll notice here DNX 4.5.1 and DNX Core. Now, you could probably just think about this as .NET version 4.5 and .NET cross-platform version. So the Core 5 has all of the libraries available that if you compile your application in Core 5, that means you can run that on Linux and you can run that on IoT and all of the other niceties. Whereas the .NET 4.5.1 is the regular .NET framework that we're all used to. A cool thing about this is you can see the way that the references are now in everything is a NuGet package. There are no more ad hoc DLL references. Everything is a NuGet package. And you can see that inside here, all of the dependencies between each individual NuGet package flows down. So you only have to remember the top ones and it'll go and fetch all of the dependency trees, but you don't have to see all of these things. And those are the core differences there. A good place to start to take a look at how these work is down here in our project.json. which is the new csproj file. So let's take a look. There's a few properties at the top here. The most important thing to look at in this project.json are the dependencies, which can also be explained as our NuGet packages. So these are the NuGet packages or dependencies that we start off with. And an important note here is the beta 5 on the end here. Now, at the moment, I'm using ASP.NET 5 beta 5. I think currently we're up to beta 7, but to get a nice stable build, I'm sitting here on beta 5 because that's what the file new project will spin up for you. And there's some very interesting ways to go about looking at what versions of .NET you have. So if I spin up a PowerShell window, I'm going to introduce you to one of the new technologies in ASP.NET 5 and really Visual Studio 2015, which is DNVM. Now, if you have a look at this, you can see that it's a .NET version manager. Now, this is beta 7 because that's the latest one. And if I go DNVM list, this is a list of all the .NET versions I have installed on my machine that is ASP.NET 5 forwards, essentially. And so you can see here beta 4, 5, and 6 is installed. We're running 6 at the moment, but the default is beta 5. And it's pretty easy to get up and running. You'll have DNVM when you install Visual Studio 2015. You can go ahead and say update self, and it will go and grab the latest version of the DNVM itself. You can say DNVM upgrade, and you'll go ahead and get the latest version of .NET, and it'll insert a new row underneath here. And then you can say, use whichever version you want as well. We'll stick to beta 5, so I'm going to say go ahead and use default. It's added that there, and if I go DNVM list now, you can see that we're using beta 5. So I'll drop that one. Oh, actually, no, let's take a look. There's the other two, I guess, .NET version tools that come with Visual Studio 2015. It's not just that version manager. You also get the DNU, which is the development utility, and lets you go and grab various NuGet packages, etc. That are core to the system. And you've got DNX, which lets you essentially run .NET applications using just this runtime. It's worth going and taking a good look at how these work. You're probably not going to need to deal with them initially, but it's very flexible in letting you target various versions. And especially if you start doing cross-platform stuff, this stuff's going to be absolutely crucial to you. But we'll move on. The key here is just to make sure that your .NET version matches your package suffix here. So if you're using beta 5 in your DNVM, make sure you're using beta 5 in your dependencies. Moving a bit further down the project JSON, you'll see some commands. If you actually don't want to target the .NET core, you can just delete this line. And that's actually necessary for quite a few libraries at the moment because not everything has been compiled against the core. And so if you reference a NuGet package that doesn't have one of those available, your build will fail. So we can just remove that line and hit save. You'll notice if we come to our references, all we have is DNX 4.5.1 now. Now, one thing we'll come back to pretty much towards the end is this scripts thing here. Now this just tells it tells your project what script should I run upon publishing, and this is going to be crucial if you're using Kudu, which is the online build tool for visualstudio.com. Basically, if you're publishing to Azure and you're using, say, GitHub, and it automatically connects and builds in that fashion, pre-publish is going to be crucial to making sure that all of your dependencies are found and built and everything like that. But we'll get to that one later. So maybe it's probably a good idea. Let's take a look at how NuGet packages work now in the latest version. So we've got the NuGet package manager. It's quite a bit different to the old NuGet package manager. This is still a pretty easy way of installing and finding packages. One thing we might do, let's install newtonsoft.json. So if we go and install that now, You can see it running the package manager, and you can see it doing everything underneath the hood. Package restored, complete. Now, what that's actually done is gone and set a reference for us. So if we go down the bottom here, you can see newtonsoft.json 7.0.1. And if you look at the project JSON file that we're in, you can see all it's done is added a row to the dependencies. Now, alternatively to using the manage NuGet packages screen, you can also just come in here and add your own dependencies. So if I wanted to add something like, say, tweet sharp. Now you get some auto completion here. I can hit tweet sharp, and then it'll give you a bunch of versions that you can use. So I can just say I want to use the latest version, and as soon as I hit save, check out the bottom left corner. We get package restore in progress. Now that only takes not very long, but essentially all it's doing in the background is exactly what that NuGet package manager did. So there we go, it's completed. Nothing's really changed apparently, but if we look at our references, you can see that tweet sharp is now there. And if you have a look even more carefully, you'll see that it's using newtonsoft.json.701. So it automatically knows to pick up and use the same newtonsoft.json that we were using before. But even more cleverly is if we delete newtonsoft.json here directly, saying that we don't really need it specifically ourselves, we can hit save. It'll do its package restore and make sure everything is up to date. There we go, it's completed. If we look back at our references, you'll see Newtonsoft 7.0.1 is gone, and now it's referencing 6.0.6, which would be its minimum version number that TweetSharp needs. So NuGet is handling all the dependencies in the background and making sure that we only have one version of the dependency we need. But even though I haven't specifically said I need newtonsoft.json, I still have access to it in my code. For example, if I quickly go to startup and jump into some code, I can still go JSON convert, and it'll say, hey, do you want to use newtonsoft.json? There we go. So it's still referenced, but no longer are my NuGet dependency feeds littered with absolutely every dependency. It has a nice nesting, and it'll take care of all that for you. So that's a pretty good look at the new project structure. Let's move on from references, and let's hit up the next thing here, which is www.root. Now this is a brand new folder, and it's designed to be the root of your web application. So whenever you say ~/ and then give it a path name, it's going to look in here first to see if it can find a static file underneath that particular path. So this is a new home for all your CSS and your images and your JavaScript libraries. You might also notice this other folder called lib here by default. Now it's got a bunch of what appear to be third-party libraries, and that's very interesting because it also appears to have absolutely everything to do with that third-party library. So I'll show you where that comes from in a second, but all you need to know about this is that you just put all of your public-facing files in the www root, and they'll be exposed in a safe way to the public internet. Not much else to really look at in here. In fact, we'll skip over. We might come back to some CSS stuff later, but let's take a look at this lib folder a bit more closely. If we take a look at our next root folder called dependencies here, and we just jump into Bower, you might notice that the folder structures between Bower and lib are exactly the same. And that's because Bower is our new way of fetching client-side libraries. It's our client-side package manager. And eventually these libraries end up in lib exposed to the world, so we can reference Bootstrap on our pages, and we can reference jQuery and all the other things that we need access to on the client side. So, let's take a look at Bower. Bower is a brand new technology. Well, to .NET developers anyway. It's been around a while. If you jump over to bower.io, you'll be able to see what it's all about. You can install it via NPM and all that sort of stuff, but that's done for us, and we'll take a look at that in a minute as well. The key thing to look at on this web page is the fact that you can look up what packages you want to go and reference. So we see here Bootstrap, which we already had. Font Awesome is a good one. Maybe let's take a look at Font Awesome. It's a nice library, and let's import that into our project. And you can go and take a look at all this sort of stuff, but essentially all you need to know is the name of the library, which is font awesome, all lowercase, one word. So if we jump into our project, you might go, okay, let's see if we can, right click and, manage bow packages. You can't quite do that, but what you can do is open your bow.json, which is just down here. So here you see a similar JSON configuration file, again with a dependencies node, and you can see all of the dependencies we have. Now, the quickest and easiest way to add a bow package is to go in and type it in. So if we start saying font awesome, and we'll use the all one word one, just hit colon, and then it will load the version numbers for you. We'll just wait for that to come up. There we go, 4.4.0. We'll just hit enter and then save. Again, bottom left-hand corner says installing packages. And if we look back at our dependencies here, we see that we now have font awesome as one of our dependencies. Beautiful. Now, if you look back up at lib though, there it is. All already copied over and already moved over for us. So now we can just go in here and we can say reference in our layout file, fontawesome.css. So root, so it'll be, in fact, let's just do it. Layouts. There's a couple of cool environment things up here, but we might not get to those today. All we want to do is say link href, and we can go and give it our essentially ~/ which is the same as www root. And in here we can say lib / fontawesome / css / fontawesome. We'll use the min.css. And pretty much from there, you can give it its rel and its type if you want as well. But that is how we reference a bow package, and it's good because bow will manage the updates of those packages, and we'll always have the correct distribution and versioning because it's much more up to date than the old NuGet was with front end libraries. Now, one common scenario that I'm sure many people are itching to find out how to do is compile your less files now in ASP.NET 5 MVC 6. Now, I'm going to get to that at the end of the demonstration because there's an easy way and a hard way, and they both involve a new tool. But you'll see that they'll both end up in this CSS file up here. So stick around; we'll get to that one shortly. So taking a look at the other half of the dependencies, we have NPM. Now, NPM is the node package manager, and in the context of our ASP.NET application, really all this is doing is pulling in tools that our application is going to use in the build sort of stage. So front-end build management tools is really, at this point in time, most of what you're going to use. So a lot of this is just Gulp, which is another one of those new technologies, but we'll get to Gulp at the end as well. The thing to know about NPM is just that it also uses a JSON configuration file, and you can see another dependencies node, and here are, of course, the dependencies. So all of these NuGet, Bower, and NPM work the same way, and we can go in and add a couple of new things we might need. Let's work in Gulp Bower. It's a popular package, and we'll hit enter and we'll hit save. And once it builds, we'll be able to see that one. Maybe it's done. Oh no, here we go. We've still got the arrows. So it should be going and fetching Gulp Bower package, and then when it's finished loading that up, we'll see Gulp Bower there. Yeah, there it is there. So it's gone and grabbed all the dependencies for Gulp Bower, and it's plugged it into our NPM. And this NPM is really just relevant to our builds down the bottom here. So we can npm install our Bower package and then run our Bower install, which will go and fetch all the Bower packages as well. But it all starts with npm, so that's the first one that gets installed. But yeah, we can take a look at that one later down the track once we get a bit deeper into this project configuration. But the thing to take away from what I've just mentioned now is that we essentially have NuGet in our project.json, and you can find those all in the references. We have Bower for front-end package management, and you'll find them under the dependencies Bower folder and also in lib. And you'll also find NPM, which takes care of our build tools, mostly Gulp, and you can find that in package.json. So we'll minimize www root, we'll minimize dependencies, and we'll move on to controllers. So one thing that's changed now with controllers is Web API and MVC have now had their separate controllers merged into one new controller. So if we look at home controller, it's just regular old controller, and this should all look the same. You'll notice it's an I action result now, so you can start creating your own action results a little bit easier without having to inherit from action result itself. And we can take a look at the account controller and the manage controller as well, but I'm not going to get into too much detail about these. These account ones are just for your registration and login and all that sort of stuff. And it's all built for you, and it's quite good. If you want to see more information about the identity system and the membership system, I've already done a dev superpowers on that whole stuff, and took an hour to really deep dive into that. So take a look at that dev superpowers for more information on that. And we can also take a look at the manage controller, and we can see essentially this is once you're logged in, you can add phone numbers and two-factor authentication and all that good stuff. And again, that's in that same dev superpowers talk. So what I might show you is just the fact that, I mean, we've already gone to index and we've seen that it's spun up a new view, but we can also just return objects straight away. So maybe if I come down here and create a new class called, let's say, test object, and I will just jump in and make sure that auto brace completion is unticked for me. That really bugs me, and my coding style doesn't work with it. But there we are. So let's create, let's say, an int called ID, and we'll make another property called string, and it can be called name. This is just a test object to return. So if I create a new public, and I'm going to return a test object, and I'll call it test. And all I'll do is return a new test object. So rather than using the action result JSON or anything like that, I can just directly return the object, much like you would in the old web API. And I can say, okay, the ID is equal to, let's just give it a random number, and the name can just be Ben. So if we take a look at that, noting that we don't actually need to build, we should just be able to run it with /test. Oh no, we do need to build. So the new Roslyn compiler and all that sort of stuff means that typically you won't need to build your code. Oh, that's because it's home test. There you go, maybe it did work. But the beauty of this, the beauty of these controllers now is that you can just return an API-like object, and it'll go and return JSON, or it'll use content negotiation to figure out what content you want, but by default it should be JSON. So that's nice and simple. You just return the object. You'll get nice strongly typed methods in that case, or you can just return an action results and you'll get a regular ASP.NET page. So that's some of the niceties you get with the controllers now. But one thing to be wary of that I've run into a fair bit is that if you're used to the data binding whereby you can put a couple of properties, so let's say I wanted, now I'll demonstrate this just quickly using a new method down the bottom here. Let's call it test2. I won't actually run it, but the gist of it is if you're used to using post requests and you just use Angular or jQuery to send a JSON payload to your action result here, if you try to mix and match model binding and parameter binding, it doesn't work anymore. It uses a more web API style model binding or data binding here. So if I, for example, went string name here, and then I had, say, test object model, and I sent a payload to this that just had, a JSON object that looked kind of like, I don't know how well this will look in C#, but essentially, if you had something like, something like this. Now pretend that's JSON, that's the JSON payload being sent to the method. This won't work anymore. It really only wants one thing to be bound, and what you'll find you normally have to do is put in a from body in front of your model, and this is the way to get an object that looks like this bound to your model here. So yeah, just be wary. I've run into a few. It's not as simple as it used to be, though I'm sure it's much more improved in terms of consistency. Whereas the previous ASP.NET 4.5 MVC5 would kind of let you do anything. I'm sure it was confusing when you started having query string parameters and a post body, and everything sort of mashed up together. So it's a good idea just to be wary of that particular problem you might run into. But nonetheless, that's quite fun. I really enjoy being able to send back pages and just objects as well, and have it just return JSON. That's beautiful. But we'll move past controllers, and we'll hit up the next thing here, which is migrations. Now, for those of you familiar with Entity Framework code first migrations, they're now just automatically enabled for that file new project. Now they've done this so that you can create the identity schema. Now again, I've talked about this in the other dev superpowers, but all they've done is they've spun up the identity schema for you. If you take a look at the model snapshot, for those of you who don't know how it works, essentially there's a snapshot every time you make a new migration so that the code knows what the database should look like and what it looks like now, so it knows how to scaffold a new migration for you. So they've included the first one, create identity schema. And if we take a look here, you can see context type, application DB context. So if we jump into this particular one, you can see that this is just your standard DB context. Now, again, in that identity talk, I talked about the new identity DB context. You might recognize just the standard one that looks like that. But identity DB context builds on top of that. It takes an application user, which would normally be just your user object in your database, and it essentially scaffolds all of that stuff for you. In fact, if we just hit Control F5 and build this, we'll let that run. You'll notice that if we register, and I'll just throw in my email address, feel free to email me if you like, using just password 1, because it wants some pretty complex passwords to start with. We'll hit register, and you'll notice it's worked. So it's obviously plonked the data somewhere. And this is probably a good time to show you exactly where the databases have been put. So I'm going to flick over to SQL Management Studio, and you'll notice I've got 3 connections enabled here. I've got regular localhost, just straight localhost, which holds my specific instance of SQL Server. This is all the stuff, the databases that I go and add manually, and it runs against my manually installed server. And then I've got a couple of not SQL Express, but the built-in SQL engine that comes with Visual Studio that it uses by default. I think is it called LocalDB? Maybe it is. But you'll have V11 here, which is the 2013 version, and you can see all of the automatically generated databases that I made back then. And you'll see localDB / MSSQL localDB. Now this is the instance name they've given it now to basically standardize it. So V11 is going to change every time, and I think they're going to use this particular instance name from now on. So you can always just connect to this particular local string here. So if you go to Database Engine, it's just this guy here, localDB / MSSQL localDB. You can connect straight to it, and you'll get your databases. In fact, if we refresh, there's Cheese 2. And we can take a look at the tables, and you can see here, here's all the identity tables. If we have a quick look at the migration history, you can see it's just run that particular create identity schema. But yes, so I won't go too far into that. Just know that Code First Entity Framework, sort of migrations are a really great thing, and you should really take some time to have a look at them. And now that they're built in, you may as well. Maybe let's take a quick look now at the identity. Oh, that's where we are, the identity model. So yeah, there's not really much more to show here. You've got the account models that it gives you. Again, that's just for registering accounts, and this is just for managing them. So not too much to look at there. The next thing I have to show you, though, this is quite a good improvement, I think, to the ASP.NET 5 sort of experience, and this is built-in dependency injection. And I'm going to give you a demonstration of this via the message service that it gives you to start with. Now, this is a pretty innocuous service. It's just something that lets you send emails and SMSs. They tell you to basically implement it yourself. But the cool thing here is that the identity system and the two-factor authentication system will let you send an SMS code and an email to verify yourself. But yeah, a side effect of this is that they're using some interfaces here, and they implement those interfaces, but in the actual code itself. So if we take a look at where the email sender is used, for example, in the account controller, we'll just take a look to find this guy. Here he is. So basically, when you're registering, you can say confirm your account, and I'll show you. The key thing to take away from this isn't the fact that you can do, confirming your account. It's to show you just how the interfaces work and the new dependency injection. So here, all we get given is an email sender of email sender, and we send an email. We don't actually know physically how that's been implemented. And way at the top here, you'll see a few lines. You get a private read-only variable email sender. And then the account controller constructor here is given an email sender. So the MVC pipeline is spinning up an email sender. We don't know which one yet. We'll go take a look at how they decide. But they give us an email sender. Our application doesn't have to care how the email sender is implemented, just that it does its job. And so this leads me to the built-in dependency injection, which we can see down here in Startup. So I'm skipping down to the bottom now. The startup class, I'll roll through all of this with you, but the thing we're going to look at just now is the DI, which is in our configure services. So we'll jump straight to the bottom of configure services, and you'll see register application services. Now this is where you're going to be putting your own application services as well, but the demonstration here is just on the email sender. Let's take a look at this. You'll see we've got services.addTransient. We've got the email sender, which is our interface, and then we have the auth message sender, which if you look back here is the name of the concrete class that implements our email sender. So what does addTransient mean? Well, for those of you unfamiliar with dependency injection, essentially what's happening here is we're saying at the beginning, when we spin up our application, every time my application requests an email sender, I want you to give it an instance of auth message sender. Now the addTransient means that I want to give it a new instance of auth message sender every single time it asks for a new one of these email senders. But you've also got a few more options. Now, guys who do know what dependency injection is, you're also going to want to take a look at this, because we've got addTransient, which requests a new instance every single time. We have addScoped, which is probably my favorite one, which essentially means give me a new instance for each scope. And just to let you know, scopes in this case, or for the most part, are always going to be one HTTP request, essentially. So every time a request hits your server, it's going to give back one instance to that request. And so no matter how many times your application asks for it, it'll spin up a new one at the beginning of the request, and then it will give back that same instance every time. Now this is especially important for databases, which we'll go look at in a second. So that's addScoped. The next one is addSingleton. So with addSingleton, this will give back one new request across the entire lifetime of your application. And this is good for caches and other things which your application just needs to track as a whole the entire time. And for things that can be spun up once and like static things that can be used across your application. And finally, there's also addInstance. Now this is exactly the same as addSingleton, except you give it the instance that you want it to use. So you say new, I would say new auth message sender here. And maybe I want to give it some special configuration that I pull out of the config file or something like that. But essentially I can say, you know, something special. I can give it that instance and I can hand it to add instance. And it will use this exact instance every single time. Whereas with the rest of these ones, it's going to go and just call the empty constructor on this class. And that's a bit of a look at how the DI is built into the system now. So if you haven't used dependency injection before, have a go. It's quite good. You'll find that it helps you build modular code. I might just comment that out, but leave the rest there. If you are experienced with dependency injection, you might find the built-in dependency injection interface a little bit limited. You might want to use, at SSW we use AutoFac, and there are a lot of, there's a lot of specialized functionality that it provides that the general or the generic interface does not provide. But fear not, because you can actually just replace the built-in container with your own container and go and build your container however you like. And it'll just work with your controller injection. It'll just work exactly the way you're used to. It won't get in your way. So that's good news. All right, actually, here's a really cool little tidbit. Just while we're on the topic of add scope for databases, you might be thinking, oh, okay, well then, what about our built-in database, the one we just looked at with the registry? So you can see at the top of configure services, it's using entity framework. And you can see all it does is say add entity framework, add SQL Server, and then add a DB context. Now, from this, you're probably not quite sure how it really works. How often am I going to get a context? Is it every time? Is it, is it scoped like it should be, like I said down here? And if you jump in, and I'm going to use ReSharper's decompilation service here. If you look at add DB context, we've got the service collection extension and add singleton like we had before, and you see here that it's just adding some options as singletons. And then the money shot here is the add scoped. You can see that for our context that gets provided to us, we'll add that as scoped. So every time you request a context, it'll give it back one per request, which is exactly what you want it to do by default. So it's good to see that they've set that as the default for this stuff. And if you look at account controller, not everything has to be an interface either. You see here that application DB context, they're just requesting the concrete class, and they're going to get one of these per scope. So that's great. That's good to see. Probably the next thing to have a look at here is the configuration. So you might have noticed this quick little guy here. Configuration, that's not configuration manager. This looks a bit different. And that's because it is different. In fact, if you look at your code, you'll notice there's not even a web config. It's all being completely replaced by config.json. Now, I'm in two minds about this particular config.json. I like that it's using JSON now, not XML, but the thing I miss most is IntelliSense on, IntelliSense on the configuration you can use. Like if I want to set up an SMTP network, I no longer have, something telling me, oh, yep, you need SMTP node, and then you need the port and all this sort of stuff. So I do miss that, but one benefit that you now gain from this is some nice strongly typed app settings and other bits. So if we take a look at our config.json, you'll see this node here, data, default connection, and then connection string. So this is exactly the same as our old connection strings node. Here's the name of the connection string, there's its content, and it all sits under this data node. Now, keep in mind, none of this is you can put any of these names to whatever you want. It doesn't have to be any convention-based stuff, because you have to explicitly state that you want data, default connection, and then connection string in here. So you crawl through the nodes by just using colons. So data, colon, default connection, colon, connection string is right there. And that'll just pull back the string for you. But there you go. So that's how it uses the connection string by default. What we might do is let's play with, let's add in app settings, and let me show you how the correct way to do that. So you can see here we have app settings and site title. you know, a common thing you might want to add is some sort of key, like a consumer key or something like that. I might whack in consumer key, and we'll just say, you know, it's some sort of string. Now, what you do to access this thing is you could say, you know, get me configuration / authentication, etc., etc., etc. every time. But what you can also do now is strongly type this. So we can go make an app settings class and populate it at this configure services time when the application is spun up. So what we might do is just jump into our models, throw open a new class called app settings. And in here, we'll put in our two things. So we'll say site name, I believe it was. I might just double check that. Site title it was, sorry. Site title, and we'll put in our other string, consumer key. So we've got our two properties there on our app settings class. If we jump into our startup, we've kind of been given a bit of a guidance on how to do it. If you take a look at this services.configure method here for Facebook authentication options, you seem to be able to say, okay, for this class, I want to populate its particular parameters like so, and go and pull out each individual property. But if you have a lot of app settings, that's going to get really tedious. So instead, you can do a bit of a trick. So we'll go services. We'll still use the configure method. We'll pass it in the class we want to populate, which in our case is the app settings class we just created. And instead of giving it a lambda and populating each of the settings, what we can do is we can say configuration dot, and we can say get configuration section. And in here, all we need to give it is app settings. And if, of course, if you wanted to use a node a bit further down the tree, you could use, you know, something else and then another one. But we're using the top level node app settings here. And this line here is going to go at application start. It's going to go and populate the app settings class with these settings when you inject them into your controller. So let's go take a look at an example of that now. We'll jump into our home controller. We'll go ahead and make it private read-only variable for just the concrete app settings class. Oh, no, we won't. I remember now. Then this is a gotcha that gets me a lot. It's actually an iOptions of our app settings class. And we'll call this app settings. So iOptions is just an interface to access the app settings that we've defined. Now, if you've got ReefSharper, a quick Alt-Enter and then Enter again goes ahead and generates a constructor, passes in an app settings, assigns it to our private variable, and gets you all good to go. Otherwise, you can just type this out manually. But if we jump down here now into, let's say, index, and just to prove that it works, I'll go ahead and set viewbag.key, and I'll say that's equal to app settings dot options. And in here, you get a strongly typed, your strongly typed app settings class. So I can go ahead and say it's just equal to consumer key. And then on our home index, just below, you know, learning more, let's throw in a p tag. Oh, doesn't like that. Let's do it out here then. And we'll say that our key is equal to whatever's in the view bag dot key. So we'll just hit save and run. And here you can see key is equal to, and that's the key in our configuration file. And for anyone who's worried about performance or anything like that, keep in mind that the configuration class, even in old ASP.NET 4.5, whenever you use, and I'll just jump to it, whenever you use configuration manager or configuration like this, it actually caches it for you. So it won't read the JSON file multiple times. It'll read it once, it'll cache the values. So you can just use configuration, you know, dot get me a value as many times as you want, and you're not going to run into any performance issues. Okay, well that's the bulk of these changes. Now I'm probably going to move on to, you know, the thing I'm most excited about now, and that's the Gulp system. So Gulp, this was a big, scary change for me. It was a brand new technology. There's lots of new words, lots of code here, and I was a bit sort of taken aback by it because it's here in File New Project, and I didn't understand how it worked. So I went through a bit of the 5 stages of grief, but I'm finally at acceptance. I'm actually past that. I'm at excitement, and I want to show you a couple of the cool things that Gulp can do for you. But the first thing to recognize, and I'll just walk through the Gulp sort of workflow here, whereby Gulp is installed by NPM. So our node package manager goes ahead and installs Gulp, and it gives us a couple of other little handy Gulp tasks that we can run as well. And just a heads up, rimraf just means delete. It's an old, like, go Google it. It's a shout out to an old school Linux command or something like that. But essentially it just means delete. So that confused me as well, but that's a delete task. So Gulp is installed by NPM, and in your project you'll see that there's a Gulp file. And if we take a look at this Gulp file, there's actually quite a bit of code in it to start with. Now, keep in mind, whenever you're viewing this webinar or even the video in future, this Gulp file might be quite different. But I'll roll you through what they're going to do initially and what they've done in the past, and I'll explain each of these things. And then you shouldn't be afraid of anything that's in here anymore. It's really quite simple. You've just got to be walked through it slowly. So to start off with, we've got this thing called require, and all that does is it goes and grabs the particular set of JavaScript commands from where NPM installs them, which actually, if we have a quick sneaky peek, and we'll view all files. See this node modules that just popped up? This is almost identical to the Bower components folder that you'll also see floating around, but this is where it installs the actual files and uses them under the hood. You'll notice in all of the publishing things that it's not going to push any node modules. It's not going to push any Bower packages either, because it'll install them on the fly. But here's where all the Gulp commands and all that sort of stuff from NPM are saved. It's just called node modules. But all this does require is it goes and grabs the particular set of commands from that package. So each one of these is a package, an NPM package, and it just assigns it to a JavaScript variable here so that you can go and execute these later on. The next thing we do in this set of commands here is we're just setting up some paths. So it's just a JavaScript variable called paths, and we put in various important paths. Pretty simple. So the first one here is the project web root, which is equal to our www root. Again, very important. The rest of these paths are all relative to that root. So they're mostly looking at where to spit out files and where to sort of monitor the files that are going on. So walking through some of the tasks now. Now you'll hear that Gulp is a task runner, and its entire job is to basically build. It's almost like MS Build, but for your front-end libraries and your front-end packages and any sort of front-end work you want to do. So this will execute once all of your files and folders have been published to the server, and then it was that these will get executed on there. But I'll show you a bit more about execution. All you need to know for now is that these are the definitions of the tasks. So here we go, gulp.task. We define the task name that we're building here, and that task is a function. You'll see that in this one, all we do is delete a particular path. So concat.js dest is www root js site min.js, and all it's going to do is delete that particular thing. Now I've completely forgotten what CB is, so don't ask. I'm sure it's some sort of context, but we'll take a look at that later. The clean CSS, again, same sort of deal. It goes and deletes all of the things in this path. And here's what we call sort of a composite task. So the clean task is going to go ahead and execute in no particular order all the tasks listed in this array. So if I say I want to run task clean, it's going to go and clean my JS and clean my CSS for me. So this is a nice way to sort of build up modular tasks so that you can be quite, granular with what your tasks do, and then you can go build a big task to orchestrate them later on. So this is all the clean. The next thing we're going to do is take a look at JavaScript. You can see this is just minify JavaScript. So it goes and it says, hey, Gulp, get me all the files, so source, in this file path or multiple file paths. And in this case, I think it means and not in this one. So don't go and grab files we've already minified. Then the next thing I want you to do is pipe those files to the concatenation function. Now you'll see that concat here is equal to one of our node modules, gulp concat. Then pipe that to uglify. Again, that's just another node module. And then pipe that to the gulp.dest, which just means spit out these files, gulp.destination. Pipe them to the destination of dot. So basically just pipe them to exactly where you found them. So all that's going to do is pick up all of the JavaScript and then minify them. And you'll see that there's also some minification scripts here for CSS. Now, that's all well and good, right? That's, it's good to know. But now I want to take you through the magic that is Gulp. So here's the power of Gulp. What we're going to do is we're going to compile a less file. Now this used to be done using one of my favorite extensions called Web Essentials by Mads Christensen. But he removed the less compilation functionality and really left a lot of people in the dark. And the reason is, is a sound reason, because Gulp is so much more powerful and it can do a lot more. And he's going to have far less support tasks to deal with his own less compilation thing. So what we're going to do is we're going to go take a look at exactly how to go do that. And so the first thing I want to do is maybe we can go to npm, npmjs.org, I think it is, no, .com, npmjs, and this is where all of your npm packages sit. Now, I already know the names of the packages I want to use, but you can go and you can Google popular packages in here, and one of them is going to be gulpless. And gulpless is just going to go and compile down our less files for us. It's just a less compiler. And you've got some things here, npm install gulpless, okay, and then you can see it gives you an example task and all that sort of stuff. So let's go do that the .NET way, the way that we're going to go do this. So we'll jump down to our package.json, and very similar to how we added gulp bower, we're going to go ahead and add gulpless. We hit colon, it gives us the version number, we hit enter, we hit save, and pretty much instantly we get given the that particular node module. We could open that up again, but we won't bother, because all we need to do now is give that a name. So I'm going to call it less is equal to require, and I'm going to say that's called gulp less. It's just the package name. And whoops. Now that we have gulp less defined in this less variable here, let's set up a task to go build our CSS, our less. So I'm going to say gulp task. I'm going to give it the name of, I guess, compile less. I'm going to say, here's the function that does it. And all I need to do now is say gulp.source, and I need a list of source files to go get. So, what we'll do up here is we'll say, right, paths.less files is equal to, now it's not going to be in our web root. Instead, I'm going to put it in a folder called less. I'll look at all subfolders, that's what this double star means. And I'll look for all files that have the suffix or the extension less.less. So not ww root, but actually the root of the project file, project itself, similar to up here. And then a folder called less, and then any less files in any subfolders in that folder. So let's go build that now. And you'll see the reason I'm putting it out here in a second. So we'll get a less file, a less folder. Again, you can just go up here and look for less, and there it is. We'll call it site.less. And let's make it interesting, I guess. Let's give the background color of blue to our body. That should be fun. So we'll hit save, and then, well, It really doesn't do anything, does it? So we've got site.less there in our less folder. And the goal here is to get our less file into our www root section. Now, the reason we keep our less out here and not in here is because essentially we don't want to serve any content that we don't have to. So we want to protect all of our source code. So we'll protect our less files out here and keep our actual deployable public root folder clean by only giving it its compiled CSS files into here. So that's the goal. We want to take this site.less and compile it down into a site CSS in here. In fact, we'll just go ahead and delete the existing one. We don't need that. We want to put our own one in there. So jumping back to our Gulp file, we've set up our path now. So what we're doing is we're going to say all the less files in .less. Get me all of the paths, yes, .less files. Get me all of those files. And then I want to go down and I want to pipe those files over to our less function. Now this less function was defined by us just before, it's up here. So we pass it off to there and we just type less and that's it. So we call that function and it pipes those files over. And then to get the result of that, we'll go ahead and we'll pipe and using syntax similar to our minification over here, we're going to pipe those files now to a destination. And instead, that destination is now our paths.webroot. And it's going to be plus CSS, essentially. Now you can go ahead, probably the good thing to do here is put another path up here and say, you know, minification destination like they've done here. But we'll just define it down here for now. That's fine. So there we go. We have a compile less task. It's going to grab the less files. It's going to compile them and it's going to put it in our CSS folder. Beautiful. Right. How do we do that? How do we run this task? Well, you've got a new neat little thing down the bottom here called Task Runner Explorer. And I'll just go up the top here and make sure I've got everything saved the correct way. So less is equal to require, gulp less. Yep, and we've defined our gulp.tasks. There we go. That was my typo. So gulp.task. Back to task runner. There we go. There you go. So actually, it's probably a good thing you saw that because this gulp file is a bit thingy. If you make a mistake, all you're going to see is the fact that, you know, it broke. And you can come in here to the output and go to show output from Task Runner Explorer. And yeah, here we go. It tells you the error. So it's not that bad. You can see property tasks of object, gulp file, line 46. Line 46. No, not quite right. But yeah, you can get the gist of the problem by seeing that. But now that I've saved it correctly, all you have to do is save, and you'll see this Task Runner Explorer. And here are all our tasks. So all the default ones, cleans and the mins. We've also got our compile less task. Now, you can just run it one off like we're going to do now. We'll just hit run. It says, okay, compile less. That seems pretty good. And let's go see what it did. And we can have a look in here. And oh, look, there's a site CSS. And there's our less file compiled down to a CSS file. And to show you that, you know, it's not just smoke and mirrors, let's go ahead and add a less function. So we'll say, you know, something that less can only do and not CSS. So we'll say a nested property here, and we'll say all the links are now going to be the color red. That'll be nice and eye-jarring. And so we'll save that, and then you'll take a look back at your CSS and you'll go, oh, hang on. That didn't work. Yeah, I think I have to go in here and I have to right click and I have to hit run, and then it will compile, and then, oh yes, there we go. So every time I've got to go in there and I've got to hit run. Gee, that doesn't seem like a very nice way of doing it. It does function, so that's nice, but surely we can do better. And we can. So the next thing I want to show you is just one more step that's just getting a bit more powerful, and that's called a watch. So we've got our gulp task, and every time we run that, it works fine. But gee, wouldn't it be nice if it just ran automatically? So what we're going to do is we're going to set up another gulp task. Again, everything in here is just going to be a task. And we're going to call it watch. And this watch task is going to be a function. And in here, we're going to go gulp.watch. And what this does is it watches some files, an array of paths or files, and it executes an array of Gulp tasks. So essentially what we want to set up is we want to say, hey, go and watch the less files for me. So if anything changes in a less file, then go ahead and execute the compile less task. So I hit save, and then I go to my task runner explorer, and I go, oh, there's a watch one. Now if I hit run, notice up here it says watch running. And you'll see that even though it says finished here, it's still running. And so now, every time I go to less and I add a new thing, so let's say I go H2, let's say that all the color of the H2s are now, I don't know, green. And I just have to hit save, and you'll notice in our Task Runner Explorer, it's executed this compile less task for me. And so now if I go to Site CSS, it's automatically added it for me. And you know, that's pretty much exactly the functionality I was after. I can now just save and bang, it's compiled. And not only that, it's compiled in the correct spot, so I can control where the files live. And so that, you know, that is thoroughly better than the way we used to do it, where you'd have the less file and then underneath them, just the files would appear. I do think that this is much better because you now have a pipeline. You can, you know, alter the way that these things work. And the final thing I want to show you, I've got just enough time to show you the final thing, and that's actually minifying the code as well. So here's how we would go about that. Again, I know the node module I'm after in this case, so I'm going to go to package.json. I'm going to go to gulp minify CSS. I wonder what that will do. We'll hit save, and that's going to go and download that particular node module for us. But we don't need to wait for that. We can just jump straight to Gulp file. We can add another one in here, and I'm going to call this minify CSS is equal to require, and we'll call it Gulp minify CSS, remembering that that has to be the package name from node, Gulp minify CSS. And now in our compile less task, just underneath, you know, so the less compiler has gone and compiled it. Now I want to, you know, pipe the output of that less one to our minify CSS node module, essentially, and processor. And we'll just hit save. And now, you know, let's go see if that worked. So again, I'm looking at this watch, and I'm just going to hit save in here. I'm going to take a look at our site CSS. And, oh, actually, one thing I might do, and you might need to do, I'm not sure about this, is exit that task and just try again. So I'm just going to manually run compile less just to make sure it updated properly. And take a look. Yep, there we go. So I think with the watch, you need to restart the watch when you change the tasks themselves. But essentially now, we've taken our site less, I've just added a node module to minify it, and bang, there it is, it's minified. And so you can imagine the power of this pipeline here. You can, you know, alter it in any way, shape, or form you like. You can, you know, run it through some linting programs to make sure it, you know, abides by your, you know, style guide or anything like that. But you know what? Actually, we're not quite there. You know, we're looking at this, and it's still site.css, but now it's minified. You know, ideally, I'd like to see the way I used to have it, where I'd have a site.less, then a site.css, which was just compiled, and then a site.min.css, which was minified. And we can go do that as well. So one last addition to our package.json, and this one's called Gulp rename. We'll go ahead and save that, jump back into our Gulp file, and we'll grab, we'll just call it rename. Gulp rename. Okay, so rename is there. Now we can jump down into our compile less function, and we'll say, okay, once it's minified, we'll now rename it, and we'll use a bit of some options here. And we'll say that this suffix is now .min. And we'll go ahead and save that. Task Runner Explorer, we'll run that one manually again, just while we're changing the tasks. And we'll jump up into our CSS and you see, oh, hang on, okay, so here's site.css and straight underneath it, site.min.css. But then now what you might see is that, oh, well, how do we get site CSS just to be normal? Well, that's actually a nice little easy trick. We just grab this, this destination line, and just before it's minified, removing that extra semicolon, just before it's minified, we can of course just pipe it multiple times. So this time we'll pipe the compiled version, but not quite minified yet version, and not yet renamed. So if we hit save, compile less one more time. So we have site.less, that's our less file. Site.css is our regular CSS file. And site.min.css is our minified file. And that's just, that's really powerful. Actually, you know what? 1 second left. I'll give you just the final tip that makes all of this seamless. So you notice that I had to come into my Task Runner Explorer, and to get it to, run the watch function, I'd have to come in here and hit run. And so I'd run it. And it's only from now on that it's going to notice that every time I hit save, it needs to run this compile less. But one cool little thing right at the end here is the fact that we'll close that task, and you've got these bindings. So for any Gulp task, you can actually bind to these particular events in sort of the MS build or the Visual Studio pipeline. So before build, after build, upon clean, and this one here, project open. So if we go and take our watch and we apply it to project open, and I think we need to refresh, save the Gulp file, of course, because the bindings are just up the top here. See here, project opened watch. So if we save that, take a look at our Task Runner Explorer, and you can see on project open, it's going to execute watch for us. And just to show that that works, we can go ahead and unload the project and just reload the project. And now that we've reloaded, come down to Task Runner Explorer, and you can see that our watch is running. And if we were to go to our site.less, it will execute that compile less function for us. We'll just have a quick look. Hit save, and there it is, compile less. And that's all there really is to it. I'm glad I covered so much content in that hour. I hope you've enjoyed all of that. There's a lot to get through, but nothing should be new and scary to you anymore. It should just be, you should be able to just get in there and start editing. If you want to check out future Dev Superpower videos, make sure you go over to devsuperpowers.com. You'll find all of our future webinars and even our past webinars if you want to catch that identity one I did last time. Also, be sure to head over to SSW TV at tv.ssw.com. Not only can you find our Dev Superpowers videos, but all sorts of content that we provide. I've done a bunch of other videos there. All of the SSW guys have, and you'll find content from all over the world there as well. You can catch me on Twitter at benwholikesbeer, which is an excellent handle if anyone asks. Yeah, thanks for sticking around. I look forward to seeing you in the next Dev Superpowers. Cheers, guys.